Introduction to the Old Testament, Unit 10, The Conquest of Canaan. We need to say something about history. I probably should have said more about this when we're talking about Deuteronomy. There is a difficulty in having an exact chronology of the Old Testament. We do get an exact chronology for much of the material in the Assyrian period because they had what is called eponym lists. This was that each year was named after one of the prominent people in the community. It wasn't dependent upon the king, but upon this individual. So he had 1 year in which he was the main person, and anything that happened during that year was recorded. One of them had an eclipse mentioned during his time, and so it was possible to go back and establish exactly what year that was. So from about 780 until about 666, we have an exact chronology in Assyria. So then we compare that to other events that happened in other countries, and we can come up with a very good dating system. Now, when we talk about dating, we usually give the year of the king, but the king changes, and so that is not useful. When we look at history, there are different theories of history. There's one which is a linear, where you have a starting point and you have an ending point, and everything goes on a straight line. Now, when we think about the salvation of God, that is linear because it has a starting point with creation and it has an ending point with Jesus coming in the second coming. And so that part of it is linear. But most of the history that we see in the Old Testament is cyclic. That is, it goes over again and again. We can see this in the way in which an event will happen and cause an effect, and it happens again, and it happens again. With this cyclical effect, most of the secular kingdoms would use omens and incantations and other devices to try to determine what was going to happen, because it should be repeated once again. We have this theory then that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about history. And far as the composition is concerned, there is a difference in the Hebrew and the English editions of the Bible. You notice that in the English edition, we have Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and all those are historical books. In the Hebrew, this is not the same. What we have is the book of Joshua, and then we have Judges, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and that is the historical books, or that we call the former prophets, because they are so influenced by the prophetical movement. And then we have the regular prophetic books in the Hebrew account. And in the Hebrew, we have the books of Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther are all in what are called the writings, which is the third section of the Old Testament. Now, the characteristics of the books have been examined for a long time, and in the first half of the 20th century, many scholars were trying to determine the composition of the historical material on the basis of the J theory. This was the Yahwistic, the Elohist, the Deuteronomy, and the priestly material, and it was supposed to be composed in that order. This was not followed by all of the scholars. Note, in 1932 published a work in which he talked about Deuteronomistic history. And that was dominant for a number of years, but then other theories arose. What we have now is more of independent sources that were edited into the books that we call Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. These books are historical in nature, but they are also theological. And we probably should put more emphasis upon theology than we do on history. For we find that there is a cause and effect relationship that exists based on the covenant. Did the people obey the covenant, or did they throw it away? And so many times, instead of doing what God says, they rebelled and they did their own thing. So history can be genuine in the sense that it really tells us what happened, or it can be propagandistic. A lot of the material written by Assyria, Babylonia, was written for the king, and it built the king up and what he did, and so we would call this propaganda. You can see the same thing today. When you look at the history of the United States, there is an actual history that took place from the time of the rebellion and the Constitution, and then the Civil War, and what we are experiencing today. But much of what is written is propagandistic. It does away with the supernatural, and it tries to substitute for that an agenda that promotes a particular view that many of us think is contrary to what happened in the history of the United States. I have lived through 90 years of history, and I know that things have changed. Not what I grew up on in grammar school, but what is being taught now in our grammar schools. So there is a big difference. So when we look at history, we're going to have to be very careful. What does it say? What does it intend to say? Now let's turn to the historical books, especially the book of Joshua. And in the key terms or key ideas for Joshua, we have the faithfulness of God in fulfilling his covenant promises. That is certainly dominant in the book of Joshua. It is God fighting for Israel. Israel is not doing it on their own. We look at the conquest and the apportionment of the land. And this is what God told to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You are going to inherit this land. And Joshua fulfills that part of the promise. And chapter 12 on, you have a distribution of the land to the various tribes. And then another key idea is the importance of obedience. If they do what God says, everything goes well. If they disobey him, then there is tragedy. Now, the purpose of the book of Joshua is summarized nicely in Joshua 21:43 to 45, which says, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of all the Lord's good promises in the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. The book shows how God keeps his covenant promise to give the land to Israel. Now let's take a look at what happens as the people go into the land and conquer it. In the book of Joshua, we have them first of all having Joshua as the new leader. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, he was appointed to take Moses' place. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert and from Lebanon to the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, and the great sea on the west. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Constantly, Joshua is told to be strong and courageous. That is repeated several times. We also have to take into account that there are 3 tribes, or 2.5 tribes, on the east side of the Jordan who have already received their territory. But they have promised that they will cross over with the rest of the Israelites and fight until they have secured their land. We see this in chapter 1, verse 16. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your words, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. And so we have then the preparations made to go into the land. First of all, they send 2 spies to Jericho. They are across the river from Jericho, and the spies are sent to find out what is happening in the land. And it says they went to the house of a woman named Rahab. She was a prostitute, and they learn a lot about the conditions. The spies have been seen, and the king sends word to Rahab that she's supposed to turn these men over to the authorities. But she has taken them to the roof of her home and hid them under layers of flax. She told the authorities who come to her, they went just before the gates were closed. If you hurry, you can catch them before they get to the fords of the Jordan. But then she goes to the spies and she tells them, I know that you people are going to take over the land. We are afraid when we have heard what you did to Sihon and the other kings on the east side of Jordan, and we know you're going to be victorious. Now, I want you to do a favor for me. I would like to live, and I would like my family to live. So can you arrange that? And so the spies make a covenant with her that they will protect her and all of her family if they are inside her home. They also give her a red cord that she is to hang within the window that will identify her house. She also does something that is very smart, and that is she tells the spies, go to the hill country. Stay there until these people that are searching for you come back, and then go across the Jordan. So this is what is done. She lets them down through a window of her house. Her house is part of the outside wall. And they go to the hill country, and they stay there then until it is safe to cross over. Then we have the story of the crossing of the Jordan. Now this is going to be an event similar to the crossing of the Red Sea. Now, of course, the Jordan isn't quite as big a body of water, but the people are told to prepare themselves because they are going to cross the Jordan on dry land. And we are told that early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. They wait for 3 days to be sure that everybody is prepared. They're to be consecrated. And so they do this, they prepare, and then Joshua tells the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant to step into the water of the Jordan. You see this in chapter 3, verse 14. So when the people broke camp across the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, the Salt Sea, was completely cut off. So there is an action that God performs many miles to the north, and it blocks the water of the Jordan. Now this has actually been observed in modern time, where there has been a dropping of the banks of the river into the river, and it has blocked the river for hours. This may have been caused by an earthquake of some kind. We don't know how God did it. It's just that near the Zarethan, the river is blocked, and the Israelites are then able to cross across the Jordan without being wet. Another thing they do then is they set up a memorial. 12 men are told to take stones from the riverbed, carry them over, and then they are set up as a memorial where they camp. Now, there's some translations at this point that speak about setting up a memorial in the river itself. That is not so. The term that is used there means from, and it's the stones from the riverbed that are set up as a memorial. So there's only one memorial, and that is after they cross over. Another activity that must be taken into consideration is the circumcision of all of the men. Now we have this command given to Abraham that on the 8th day a male child is to be circumcised. But here they have been going for 40 years in the wilderness and no one was circumcised. So that has to be remedied. So there is a period of time in which all the men are circumcised. And then they wait until they are healed before they move on. The first city that they attack is Jericho. And this is an interesting activity because God tells them what they are to do. The army is to march around the city once each day for 6 days. Now, the priest has the Ark of the Covenant, and they go before the soldiers. There are soldiers in the front, and then the Ark of the Covenant, and then the rest of the soldiers follow. And they do this for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they go around the city 7 times. Now, we may think that that is difficult because we are used to cities that are spread out. But the cities at that time were very, very small, just a few acres. And so it is easy to walk around that city 7 times. And when the 7th time is reached, the trumpet is blown, the people shout, the walls of Jericho fall, and they take the city. Rahab and her family are rescued, and we learn later that Rahab actually marries into the community of Israel and is an ancestress of Jesus himself. During the campaign to take the city of Jericho, there is a man who sees some goods that he wants to keep. He sees a Babylonian garment, he sees a bar of gold, and he sees some shekels of silver. And he hides them in his tent. This is in chapter 7. This is not discovered until after the battle is first fought at Ai. Ai is a small city, and they didn't think they needed many of the soldiers to go there, and so they sent a contingent, but they were defeated by the people of Ai. And they couldn't understand why this happened. So they fall down on their faces and they approach God, and God tells them, stand up, because there is sin that has caused this. The city of Jericho was put under a ban. That meant that everything was to be destroyed, excepting metals which could go through fire. Now the silver, the gold, the bronze, anything like this was to be handed over to the priests. But Achan saw these and he hid them. So the next morning, the tribes came before Joshua, and the tribe of Judah was taken. In verse 16 and verse 17, the clans of Judah came forward, and he took the Zerahites. The Zerahites came forward by families. Zimri was taken. Joshua has the family of Zimri, and Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was taken. And so Joshua tells him to confess, to give praise to God, give glory to the Lord. And Achan replied in verse 20, "It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath." They sent and brought these items to Joshua, and then Achan and his whole family were stoned, and then they were burned. And over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. The Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore, that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since. When Achan sinned, he not only caused his own death, but he caused the death of many of the soldiers. And he also caused the death of his wife and children. It is a very serious breach of the covenant that was made. Then Joshua is told to go to Ai and destroy it. So we are told how he does this. An ambush is set behind the city. When they attack, the soldiers in front flee from the people of Ai, as they had done the previous day. All the people of Ai come out to pursue them. Then the ambush rises up, attacks the city of Ai, burns it. And then when the soldiers who are pursuing the Israelites see the smoke going up from their city, they realize it has been taken. The city of Ai and all of its inhabitants are killed. So that is the first city other than Jericho that is taken. We see in verse 28 of chapter 8, Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. Now, when they say to this day, I should say something about the various editions of this material. When we talk about the historical books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, this probably was edited on several occasions. And when you see a term such as to this day, it's not talking about when that event happened, but it's talking about when the editorial work was done. And this may be hundreds of years after the actual event took place. And it says that he hung the king of Ai on a tree and left him there until evening. And then at sunset, he was taken down. They raised a large pile of rocks over him at the entrance to the city gate. And then the covenant is renewed. Now, the covenant is that God has established with Israel. And Joshua was told that he was to do this. And this is also in chapter 8, verse 30. Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua copied on stones the law of Moses, which he had written. All Israel, aliens and citizens alike, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And then we have the Gibeonites making a treaty with Israel. Now, Israel is still at Gilgal, and that's where they are when a delegation comes from the city of Gibeon, which is not very far from the Israelites. They come with old bread, which is moldy, with worn-out shoes, with the wineskins that have been patched, and they tell the Israelites, "We've come from a far country, and we've heard about how powerful you are, and we want to make a treaty with you." The Israelites examined their equipment and decided to make a treaty. Now, they did not consult God in this situation. And then they find out 2 or 3 days later that they are near. In fact, Joshua is able to go from the camp of Gilgal to the city of Gibeon in one night's journey. After Gibeon has made a treaty with Israel, then the city is attacked by other cities in that area. They want to punish Gibeon because they have gone over to the side of Joshua and the Israelites. In chapter 9 and verse 16, it says, 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out, and on the 3rd day came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beerot, and Kiriath Yaharim. But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. So they made these people responsible for all of the water carrying and the collecting of wood for the Israelites. These would especially be prominent in the work of the tabernacle, because that's where they needed water and they needed wood for the various offerings. But they are made subservient to the Israelites as carriers of wood and drawers of water. Then Joshua responds to an appeal from Gibeon. Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and were living near them. So they then come and attack the city of Gibeon, and the people of Gibeon send a messenger to Joshua, say, "You've made a treaty with us, so come now and protect us." So Joshua marched all night, and they attacked this coalition that has come against them. That's in chapter 10, verse 9. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. Notice the emphasis, the Lord threw them into confusion. So this is not just Joshua leading an army, but it is God taking an active part in the activities. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Again, Yahweh is taking control of the campaign. This is where Joshua makes the statement, "O sun, stand still over Gibeon, O moon, over the valley of Ayalon." So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. This comes from the book of Jasher, which is a poetical book, and it's not necessary that you take this literally in the sense that the sun actually stops in the heavens. What he is asking for is that God would help them in their campaign. And if God causes the sun to cease some of its heat, this would enable the Israelites then to accomplish its purpose. And this is the way in which Joshua then expresses it. This is God taking control of the battle. Then later we have the 5 Amorite kings killed. These are the kings of all of the nations who had come against Gibeon. So Joshua is able to conquer all of the southern territory. Now, again, do not take this too literally. What Joshua is able to do is to defeat the leadership in this area, but it doesn't mean that he wipes out everyone who lives there. So he is able to take over control. And it says that they were able to take care of 31 kings. Now these are listed for us in the 12th chapter of Joshua, beginning with verse 9. And these are the western foothills, the Arabah, the mountain slopes, the desert, and the Negev. It's the land of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And this is the territory that God promised to Abraham that it would be his. And then he reconfirmed that with Isaac and with Jacob. And then he told Moses that this is going to happen. He told Joshua that this is going to happen. And now it is concluded. So we have all of those kings. The cities are mentioned. The name of the king is not mentioned in chapter 12. And then it says in chapter 13, when Joshua was old and well advanced in years, the Lord said to him, "You are very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." Notice there is still much to do. I need to go back and pick up the northern campaign, which I skipped over here. In chapter 11, you will find that that is described not in great detail, but it tells us that there was Jabin, the king of Hatzor. He sent word to Jobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Akshaph, to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arabah south of Kinneret, in the east and west, to the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mizpah. All of these come together to fight against Joshua. And it says in verse 4, they came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, now notice again, it's the Lord who takes control. Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel, slain. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. So we are told that Joshua, his whole army, came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom, attacked them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrephoth Maim, and the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. And then it says Joshua turned back and captured Hatzor, that's where Jabin was living, and put its king to the sword. Everyone in it they put to the sword. They totally destroyed them, not sparing anything that breathed, and he burned up Hatzor itself. Now Hatzor is burned, Ai is burned, Jericho is burned, but most of the other cities are not burned. They are left as they are, and the Israelites take possession of these cities. So now all of this is finished, and in verse 21 of chapter 11, at that time Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their troops. No Anakites were left in the Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. So from this, it looks like everything is accomplished, but that's not so. Everything that God determined for Joshua to do, he did. But we read that there is also territory that was not conquered. This is mentioned in the book of Joshua itself. It's also mentioned in the beginning of the book of Judges. And we should be aware of that and take that into consideration. Now, the division of the land takes many chapters, from chapter 13 through chapter 21. Determined by the number of people in the tribe is the amount of territory that they are given. It first of all mentions what had been given to the 2.5 tribes on the east side. And then you have the land west of the Jordan, beginning with chapter 14. And you have Hebron given to Caleb. Caleb was one of the 2 spies who was positive in his attitude, along with Joshua. And because of that, the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers, who went up with me, made the heart of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So, on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." So that was given to Caleb was Hebron. Now you find out that Hebron plays a big part. Hebron becomes one of the cities of refuge. So it's taken over by the Levites. But Caleb has all of the territory around it. And then you have the allotment for Judah, clan by clan, in chapter 15. It tells you what the borders are of this territory. And the tribe of Simeon, which in the prophecy of Jacob says that they will be scattered in Israel along with the Levites, Simeon is given territory within Judah. So they don't have territory of their own, but Judah has enough to absorb them. And the number of cities that are in each of these territories is also mentioned. The allotment for Joseph is in chapter 16, and that is for both Ephraim and Manasseh. They were sons born to Joseph in Egypt. They were adopted by Jacob, and he treats them the same as he does his other sons. And their allotment is given in chapter 16. And then you have the division of the rest of the land begins in chapter 18, and you have the rest of the tribes that are mentioned there, clan by clan, and the cities they are given. They also mention the various cities of refuge within that territory. The cities of refuge are mentioned specifically in chapter 20. The Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood." This is one of the mercies that God showed to the people. If a person accidentally killed another person, he could flee to one of these cities, and they were arranged so that they were not too far from any part of the land. And then the case would be heard, and if they were innocent, they would stay in the city until the death of the high priest. And then they were allowed to return to their home. Towns are also given to the Levites. They do not receive a portion of land as the other tribes do, because they are chosen for a special purpose. No, they are to serve at the tabernacle and later to serve at the temple. So they do not have a portion of land like the other tribes do. They live among the other tribes and are given cities within each of those tribes. When this has been taken care of, then those 2.5 tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan are allowed to return home. This is in chapter 22 of Joshua. It says, Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your brothers, but have carried out the mission the Lord your God gave you. Now they are allowed to go home." But as they are making their way home, when they come to the Jordan River, they build an altar. And this altar is similar to the altar that is built at the tabernacle. Chapter 22, verse 10, when they came to Gilalot, near the Jordan, in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built the altar on the border of Canaan at Gilalot, near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. Fortunately, they send a delegation over to find out why it was built. And the people from these 2.5 tribes mention, "We built that altar as a memorial so that the people on the western side of the Jordan could not say, 'We are not a part of you.'" In chapter 22, verse 34, they say, "No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, 'What do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. You Reubenites and Gadites, you have no share in the Lord. So your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord.'" So when they made this defense, then the rest of the people accepted it and allowed them to continue in that. The Reubenites, the Gadites, gave the altar this name, "A witness between us that Yahweh is God." Now we have to take care of Joshua. Joshua is getting old. We've already been told that. And it says that chapter 23, after a long time had passed and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then old and well advanced in years, summoned all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials, and said to them, I am old and well advanced in years. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember, one of the key themes is that God fights for Israel. Remember how I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain. These nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Great Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will drive them out of your way. Notice, he's speaking about territory that has not been possessed yet by the Israelites. He will push them out before you, and you will take possession of their land as the Lord your God promised you. And so they are to obey everything in the book of the law of Moses without turning to the right or the left. And then in verse 14 he says, Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises that the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. But just as every good promise of the Lord your God has come true, so the Lord will bring on you all the evil he has threatened until he has destroyed you from the good land he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. So the covenant is renewed at the city of Shechem. He calls on the people to serve the Lord, to put away any other gods that may be there. He gives a brief history of what has happened. And then Joshua said to the people in verse 19, You are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster and make an end of you after he has been good to you. But the people said to Joshua, No, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said, You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. And then Joshua sent the people away. And after these things, in verse 29, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. That was also the age of Joseph when he died. They buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. And Joseph's bones, remember Joseph had made the Israelites promise that they would remove his bones from Egypt when they left. They took his bones and they buried him at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. And we are told that Eleazar, son of Aaron, died and was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas in the hill country of Ephraim.